So we'll kick off. So
Great.
I just a huge guest today. So during this summer, I was in Mallorca, which probably sounds like I'm there quite a bit, but I really not. But I started reading a book called Storyworthy, and it's written by Matthew or Matt, as we've
Matt
got.
is fine. Yeah, Matt is fine.
Matt Dix. And it's probably the best articulation of how to tell great stories. I think storytelling is such an important skill and so critical for entrepreneurs, but marketeers and anyone trying to build a brand. And I just absolutely loved how he took a really kind of structured approach, and so many brilliant like individual stories in there as well, that I would love to get into as well and ask some questions around. But Matt, like, it would be really great if maybe for those that haven't read the book Storyworthy, and maybe we can just maybe give a kind of high level view of what's the book about and how best to kind of structure stories.
Sure. I mean, I wrote the book in hopes of teaching general people how to tell better stories, and then sort of the business world unexpectedly found it. And I've always found that a little odd. I've felt like, you've been trying to fit a square peg into a round hole sort of with the book. And I think it's been wonderful. I mean, the book's been out since 2017, and, I've done a great deal of work with companies as a result of it. So, essentially, I try to teach people first and foremost what a story is. I think the real problem people have when they begin trying to figure out how to tell a story is they don't understand what comprises a story. A lot of times people will think something happened to me, and now I'm going to tell you what happened to me, and therefore I have told you a story. And really, you haven't told a story. You've sort of reported on your life, and no one really wants that. Like, your spouse is willing to put up with it, and your mother might actually want it, but those are the only two people who want you to report on things that happen in your life. So a story at its heart is about change. It's either transformational change, meaning I used to be one kind of person, and then some stuff happened, and now I'm a new kind of person. Or more commonly, the way you think about the world. I used to think one thing, and then some stuff happened, and now I think differently. And so we're looking for those moments of change to tell stories about. And so often, because we watch movies and read books and we see plays, we assume that a story must contain sort of action and adventure. You need to be falling out of a plane or battling a bad guy or winning a race, when really some of the smallest moments make the best stories. I was at a baseball game with my son and my daughter, my son and my wife the other day, just yesterday, and he's eating ice cream at the baseball game, and he's spilling it on his shirt. And he's 12, and I'm looking at him and thinking, like, what is wrong with you? Like, why can you not figure this out? It happens all the time. And my wife is thinking the same thing. And so she asks him, she says, Charlie, why can't you get food from the cup to your mouth without getting it on your shirt? And Charlie looks at her and says, Mom, this is called childhood. And it was a moment for me when I went, oh, he's right. He's a 12-year-old boy. Like, his job is literally to spill ice cream on his shirt because he's 12 at a baseball game. And it's a story because it's a moment of transformation for me. It actually causes me to reflect on how I'm always pushing him to reach an expectation that is probably beyond the capacity of a 12-year-old boy. That I'm really setting expectations that are a little ridiculous for him. I keep thinking he should be doing more than he is. And that little tiny moment changes the way I approach a lot of what he's going to be doing now. When he forgets something, I'm not going to think he's an idiot anymore. I'm going to think he's a 12-year-old boy, which in some ways is an idiot, but a justifiable idiot. So we're looking for those moments too. We can tell big stories about fantastic things that have happened in business. We can tell stories about our new products and, our new services or the way our companies are pivoting. But ultimately, very, very small things can have big impacts on our interiors. And I think those are the best stories kind of to tell, because those are the most relatable stories to tell.
Yeah, like in the book, you talk about the film Jurassic Park, and I don't think I'll ever quite have the same feeling about watching a film about dinosaurs. But when you kind of realize it's about a man that doesn't want children and kind of goes on that journey, and then there's that 5-second transition when he's sat in the tree, And then he realizes, actually I do want children, and ultimately changes his view on children, and then can settle down with his so-called girlfriend in the film and live a happy ever after. I thought it was a really kind of bit that kind of really made me rethink about lots of stories in that kind of way as well.
Yeah, that chapter broke a lot of people's brains, because you suddenly realize that movies are not what they really appear to be. I just had someone email me the other day. They said, I watched Tom Cruise's War of the Worlds, and I've discovered it's actually about the resolution of divorce and becoming a parent, in a world of divorce. And I said, yes, that's actually exactly what it is about. Although aliens are threatening to destroy the world, it's ultimately a story about a divorced father learning to get along with his kids. And without that, you don't leave the theater feeling anything other than the world was saved by aliens that don't really exist. Unless we have reality in a story, something that we can relate to, then it's irrelevant, which is what I'm telling people all the time when they're telling stories, is we have to find the relatable component to this thing that doesn't feel very relatable to people. And when we do that, that's when people can connect with us and start to believe in us.
Yeah. I think at Carmoola, so we change people's lives through car finance. So we provide people car loans, and this really has a big impact on their lives. And I've got to have to ask you to tell the story. Is that I absolutely love the story about when you were working in McDonald's and you had your booty call, but your car broke down. And I was thinking, when I read that, you should have. If only Carmoola was available then, you wouldn't have ever had that story to tell. But maybe you could tell the team that story, because I thought that was just super powerful and kind of really resonated with me.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell the abbreviated version so we don't have to go 6 minutes into it. But essentially, yeah, I'm driving home from New Hampshire to Massachusetts, about 100 miles, on my first booty call of my life, and what will ultimately turn out to be my very last booty call of my life, unfortunately. I'm thinking this is my future when really it is my past already. When the right front tire of my 1976 Chevy Malibu blows out, but it doesn't blow out, it falls apart. It's that tire that just disintegrates as it's deflating. It's so old, and rubber and wire are thrown all over the road. And I'm 100 miles from my home in an age when there are no cell phones, in this sort of waste area between mountains. There's nobody here, and I'm totally alone. I'm 19 years old, and I don't know what the hell to do. So I get out of my car and I hike up the highway to the last exit I find. And eventually I get to a gas station where I managed to buy a tire from this ancient mountain man. He takes all of my money in exchange for this balding tire. And then when I ask him, I say, can you bring me to my car? It's like 5 miles down the road. He says, that'll be another $10. And I say, Winston, I just gave you all of my money. And he says, well, good thing tires are round. So I roll a tire 5 miles down a highway, which might be the most physically difficult thing I've ever done in my life. I eventually get it on the car, and I'm driving home. I'm a couple miles down the road when I look at my gas gauge and I realize I have no gas. And I have just given all of my money to Winston, this half-naked mountain man. I don't have a credit card. I don't have a debit card. I don't even have a checking account at this point. I have nothing. I literally have not a penny to my name now. It's all gone. I don't know what to do, so I take an exit. I pull into a gas station. I'll never forget it. I'm sitting behind the gas station looking at this beautiful field of flowers and this mountain behind the gas station. It's like the most beautiful, picturesque view behind a gas station that exists on the planet. And I'm feeling anything but good because I'm totally alone. I'm 19 years old. My parents have thrown me out of my house, and I don't have any contact with them anymore. I don't have any family to speak of. All of my friends, they're just as poor as I am. They have terrible cars and no money, and they can barely eat too. And I just think at 19, you shouldn't be this stuck in life. I'm envisioning a life where this is going to be my life forever. Every time I run into a problem, I'm going to have to figure out a way to solve it, and there's no one to back me up. So I'm feeling pretty low, and I make a decision on how to get home. I decide I'm going to beg for money. I'm going to go into the gas station and ask whoever's behind the counter for gas. And so I go inside and I pitch my story to this kid just about my age. I tell him, here, I'll give you my wallet. I'll give you all the luggage in my car. I'll give you everything I have in exchange for about $8 worth of gas and the promise that I'll return and pay you back. And he says, no. He says, I can't give away gas. I'm going to lose my job. So I go back to my car. And, my plan is simple. I'm just going to wait for that kid to go home. I'm going to wait for the next person to come on duty. I'm going to sort of refine my pitch, and I'm going to keep begging for gas until someone says yes. But as I get into my car, I see my McDonald's manager's uniform in the back seat. I am managing a McDonald's restaurant at the time. I see the uniform, and suddenly I have this idea. So about an hour later, I'm standing on the porch of this little brick house with a blue door, knocking on the door. I've got my McDonald's uniform on now, my shirt and pants, the tie. I have this gray sort of velvet briefcase with an M on it that I'm holding in front of me like a shield. And when the door opens, this man is standing there. He's probably 50, but he looks like he's 500 to me. He looks like he has all the wisdom of the world wrapped up in him. And I know that he knows I'm about to do a terrible thing. But, there's these moments in your life where you've put yourself in a position where the only choice now is to go ahead and do what you planned on doing. So I tell him, hi, my name's Matt. I work for McDonald's, and I'm collecting money for Ronald McDonald Children's Charities. Would you like to make a donation? And he doesn't say anything. He just stares at me like Stonehenge, like he has always been here waiting for me on this day to arrive. And then he says, wait 1 minute, and he goes back into his house. And I think he's calling the cops. Like, they are definitely going to come. They're going to arrest me and put me in jail, which will actually happen in 2 years, but not on this day. On this day, he comes back. He's got a $20 bill in his hand, which is like $20,000 to me on this day, because all I need is $8. Gas is 89 cents a gallon. And so I hold up my hand to say, no, that's too much. And he says, no. And he tells me that his wife died of cancer 3 years ago. And his kids, who live on the West Coast, they haven't come back and visited for a long time. He starts talking to me about how lonely he is. He forces the money into my hand, and we sit down on the porch, and he starts just telling me his life story. Basically how he's been living in this little house in this little town all alone for the last 3 years. And I'm sitting there feeling like I have to be at this moment the worst person who has ever lived on the planet. Like, I am trying to steal money from a man who is suffering from loneliness. This is terrible. And so when he finishes his story, he sort of pushes the money back into my hand a second time, says, you need to keep this. And I do. I go back to the gas station. I put money in my gas tank. I get back in the car. I start heading home. And it's not until I get on the highway and I'm heading home that I realize really how stupid I am. Because back at the gas station, when I was staring at that field and that mountain, I was feeling alone. No parents, no one to take care of me, no one to help me. But I'm not alone at all, because I have a house full of friends that I'm driving home to. And it's Sunday, which means The Simpsons are on, which means all of my friends are going to gather in the living room, and we're going to drink beer and watch The Simpsons and laugh. And that guy in the little house with the blue door, he's going to be alone tonight. And he's going to be alone tomorrow night and the next night and the next night, so I end up leaving New Hampshire knowing nothing about loneliness, understanding now that I know nothing about loneliness, except that I never want to be as lonely as that man was in that little house with the brick door ever again. So that's the story.
Yeah. Incredible story. I love it. I love it. Like a really, really, really great connection. No pressure, marketing team. Like, we need to come up with customer stories like that.
Well, the funny thing about that story is I was going to New York to tell it, and the theme of the show was theft, and I had a couple stories to tell, and my wife said, well, you're going to tell the Ronald McDonald Children's Charity story, aren't you? And I said, I don't know. Should I tell that one? That's pretty bad. And my wife, to her credit, said, happened when you were 19. Admit things that you did that were terrible, because that makes you really vulnerable and people end up loving you for it. And she was totally right. I went there. I won the slam. I was the champion that night. The more I began telling stories, the more I started to realize that as long as I didn't do it yesterday, I can basically say anything I've ever done. And if I say it the right way, as bad as it might have been, people will forgive you, because everyone's done bad things and most people don't speak of them. So if you're willing to speak of them, you can get a lot of credit for it.
It's a brilliant story and like really well put together. And like I know from reading your book, it probably took quite a lot of crafting to get to that point as well. So no, really, really great work. Like what was it, Matt, that kind of drove you to get to this point where you realized that your passion was storytelling? What was it that you kind of your journey that kind of got you to that place where you're like, do you know what? I want to spend my life doing this.
Well, I used to think I fell into something back in 2011 when I went to New York and told my first story on a stage. My friends sort of forced me to go, but then my wife said, could you stop being so stupid and think about your life a little bit? And it occurred to me, she was right. I've been writing novels, I've been publishing novels since 2009. So before I ever told a story on a stage, I was writing stories. They were fiction, but if you read my fiction and you know me, you can see all of my stories throughout my fiction. In my first book, one of the first questions I got at a book talk was, is the father in your novel similar to your own father? And I said, oh no, I don't really know my father. The father in the book isn't anything like my father. And my wife from the back of the room said, he is your father. You wrote about your father. And suddenly I realized, oh, that's actually true. The father in the book is my father. She's correct. So a lot of the things that fiction writers use as material is our own lives. But, when I was 10, I saw the movie E.T. for the first time. And there's a scene in E.T. that is terrible that sort of breaks the movie a little bit. And when I was 10, I was so angry about it. I wrote a letter to Steven Spielberg telling him basically, I love your movies, but you keep screwing up these little things in the movies that really ruin the movie. So if you'd like to send me the movie before you put it in the movie theater, I'll be happy to tell you what's the bad part. And I gave that letter to my mother and said, mail it to Steven Spielberg. And actually for 30 years, I've been angry at Spielberg for never writing back to me, thinking like, how could you not write back to a kid? You were a kid making movies and now a kid writes to you. Honestly, it was like 5 years ago that it occurred to me, my mother never sent that letter. Like in 1981, a mother who was having a hard enough time just being a parent, there's no way she finds Steven Spielberg's address without the internet and mails that letter, right? But that was sort of like my childhood, was watching movies and deconstructing them and thinking about why they weren't working, and then reading books and analyzing what was working with them. So I think my brain's been on this topic for a long time. It just took me a little longer to start making my own stories.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And I have to ask this. You talk about your wife quite a lot in the book, and she seems to be like a real connection there. And she seems to like change the direction of your life quite a bit as well. Maybe you can, like, I think it's really important for people in the team. I'm a big believer. My wife Amy's also works. We work together for best part of 10 years now, maybe longer. And so I think maybe can you share some of the lessons that you've kind of learned about how to build a really great relationship, and how kind of working as a team can really help your life?
Yeah, well, we started as coworkers. I'm an elementary school teacher, and she walked into a faculty meeting one day in August as the new teacher in the school. And I thought, wow, like, look at her. And I also thought she's way too cool for me. I never have a shot at that one. And it took me 2 years to basically stand as close as possible to her, as long as possible and as often as possible, to get her to finally look in my direction. I have friends who have had the opportunity to work with spouses and have rejected that in fear that it wasn't going to be good for their relationship. And for us, it was always great. We do a podcast together on storytelling. And the crazy thing about our podcast is it's about storytelling, where we listen to stories and sort of critique them. And we get emails from people all the time who say, we came to the podcast for the storytelling, but now we listen as a couple, because the way that you disagree without wanting to kill each other or being disrespectful in any way, we're taking lessons about how to communicate through listening to your podcast, which is crazy, not something we ever expected. But, I think that to find the right person, or what I hope to be the right person, when I think about for my kids or anyone really, you know, for me, I think my wife genuinely is impressed by me, and I am genuinely impressed by my wife. So we always come together in a place of respect, because we're always assuming that the other person has something of value to say, and that what they have to say is probably better than what we're thinking already. And I think we both occupy that same space for each other. And I think that, whether that's your spouse, by the way, or your business partner, or the person sitting sharing a cubicle with you, I think those are the relationships that are the best, the ones where you just assume the person who you're spending time with or working with or married to, is probably wiser than you and has better things to say than you have to say. And if both sides feel that way, I think that's probably the best kind of relationship you can have.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's all about respect and seeing the good side in each other. I think is really important. Um, Kind of leading on to that, then, like you talk a lot about journaling, or I think you call it in your book homework. Some other people might call it journaling, or like I thought it'd be really. I think that's such a great life advice in terms of. I really like your point about when you're writing things down every day, your life slows down almost because you're. I think that's the point you made where you're talking about how life slows down, and by actually living in the moment a little bit. Like, I wonder if you could share some of that with the team, because for me that was quite a great piece of life advice as well.
Yeah, I call it homework for life. I won't explain the process in great detail. If you want to learn about it, there's a TED talk on it. Just Google the phrase homework for life and you can watch my 14 minutes on it. I think it's the most important thing that I teach. I think if you want to be a storyteller, it's the most important thing that you can be doing. It's sort of gathering the content that you can use to begin telling the stories you need to tell, whether that is in business or in your personal life with your kids, on a date, whatever you're doing, having those stories, that content is critical. But you're right. I think that when we start to acknowledge our lives every day, and I don't like the word journaling because journaling sounds like you have to write a story. My homework for life is an Excel spreadsheet where you only fill in one cell that stretches across the screen. So you've got like 4 or 5 sentences. But what happens is when we live our lives, if we don't take a moment to reflect on every day and find the moments that are worth holding on to, we lose that day. The moment I had with Charlie when he says, "Dad, it's called childhood," right? Or the other day, Charlie asked me, "Why is there a pocket on some t-shirts? Like, why is there a pocket on the left breast of a t-shirt that no one would ever put anything in, and yet so many t-shirts have this pocket?" And I thought, you're right. Why the hell is there a pocket on my t-shirt, right? Those are the kinds of things that, like, if you have a kid, they say all the time, and you think how clever or how interesting or how insightful he is. But if you don't actually write it down, in a week, it's gone. And so what happens to people is, if I asked you on the call right now, tell me how many days from the year 2022 that you recall, and I'll give you your calendar. I'll let you go through the calendar. If you're really good, you might remember 100 days of the 365 you lived. And so when people say time flies, it doesn't fly. It just goes unmarked and unremembered. If you can only remember 100 days from 2022, you've essentially taken 365 days and reduced it to 100. So of course time feels like it flies, because you're shortening your years completely, right? It's why your 8th grade year, when you were 10, that year feels like nothing to you because you can remember almost nothing from it. So it feels like it went by quickly. It really didn't. So if you do homework for life, which is what I do every single day, you harness every day. You make a moment of every day. And the beauty of homework for life is the more you do it, the better you get at it. So back in 2015, when I started homework for life, I was finding about 1.2 moments per day that I was writing down. So 1.2 cells per day were getting filled with an idea. Today, I'm filling more than 7 cells per day, 7 moments that I'm capturing from the day. And it's not because my life is more interesting now. It's because I've developed this lens. Now I understand that when Charlie says, "Why is there a pocket on some t-shirts?" I go, I want to hold on to that. In 2015, I probably wouldn't have written it down. I would have said, well, that's not a story. I won't write it down. But now I recognize it's a moment I had with my son that I never want to forget. And so what I've done is taken 365 days and multiplied it by 7. So that's why for me, time genuinely goes by very slowly, because every day feels full, because I'm recognizing the moments that we all have, and then I'm holding on to them. And I'm telling them as stories all the time. And so I feel terrible for parents when they say, like, gosh, your son's 12, it's going by so fast, isn't it? I never want to tell them, actually, it's not, because I do homework for life. So he definitely feels 12. He maybe even feels older than 12. It's a joyous parenting experience I'm having. I never want to say that to a parent, though, because all these parents are just throwing away all their memories and turning their child's, 6th year of life into three tiny bits of data, and that's the end of it, right? So homework for life is the opportunity to both find the content, the stories that you need to be telling, but also to acknowledge time as a meaningful thing and allow it to slow down for you. I teach children every day how to work hard and be kind. I teach them long division and how to spell. None of that is as important as homework for life, I think.
Yeah. I think it's really important. It's like it kind of creates you to be present as well. Like ultimately, if you're having to write it down, you're thinking about those moments. I know some of us in the team have got young kids. I think especially if you've got young kids, like that, you never get that time back with those young with your children, and just really capturing and really remembering some of those big moments. I just think is so important. Yeah, it's something I actively try and do. I think it's really hard. But yeah, I think
No,
it's
it's
really,
not
really,
hard. It's not. You brush your teeth every day. This is a 5-minute exercise I'm asking people to do every day. If you brush your teeth every day, you figured out a way to do that, a 5-minute sit down at the end of the day and say, what happened today, it's not that hard. I really believe it. And also, I'll say you don't really need to have kids to do it either, because I think that storytellers are people who are self-centered in a positive way, meaning they actually afford themselves time to think about themselves. I've met like a lady who was like 83, and I taught her about homework for life. And she said, well, this would have been great, but I'm 83. What's the point? And I said, well, we can just end it now. I can get a pillow, I can hold it over your face, and I can kill you now if you don't think that today is worth anything. Like, if you just genuinely think your life is over, let's end it right now and move whatever money you have on to the next generation. Like, I think it's crazy to think I'm 83 and I shouldn't be holding on to my days still. And she got the message. She understood what I was saying. My wife didn't really appreciate the way I sent that message, but I was trying to make a point, right? So no, I don't think it's hard, and I think everyone should absolutely be doing it 100% of the time.
no, that was really cool. Before we go into any questions, like I'd love to hear a bit about your new book, because I haven't seen it or heard about it yet. So yeah, I'd love to just hear a bit about that.
Sure. Well, it's called StorySLAM, and essentially it is the story-worthy book for business folks. It's the one that sort of takes the principles that I teach in terms of telling a great story, which apply everywhere, and it drills it down a little more specifically into sales, branding, marketing, leadership, those kinds of things. So I tell I give a lot of the same strategies plus some new strategies in that book, but then I tell stories about how those strategies have been deployed in business with the people I work with. For example, one of my favorite stories is I was working with a biotech company, and they make tubes. I don't really understand what they make, but somehow they make some kind of tube, and they're used in like manufacturing processes or something. So their company, John is his name, he's a scientist. His company makes 18 different kinds of tubes, different sizes and different materials. The competitors all essentially make one tube. So you buy from the competitor one tube, and you have to sort of make it work. You have to cut it or retrofit it to make it work your machine. John's company sells the 18. They're way more expensive than the companies that are selling one, but you get exactly what you want. So John's going to a conference with 4 other scientists to sort of present and hopefully get some leads. And I worked with all the scientists, and they all told stories, and they all did great. But John did something none of the other scientists did. He didn't talk science at all. He went to the conference, he stood on the stage, and he said, essentially, when I go grocery shopping every Saturday morning, it's crazy for me because my family can't agree on the type of apples that we like. So my son likes like cosmic crisp apples, and my daughter likes yellow delicious, and my wife needs like 4 McCowns for a pie she's making, but she likes to eat red delicious, so I need to get 3 of those. And I like gala apples. He said I spend 15 minutes every Saturday morning just buying apples and putting them in all these different bags so they don't get confused. Like it makes him crazy. But he says everyone gets what they want when I get home. And then he says, that's what my company does. We believe you should have all the apples. He says, our competitors say, here's a Macintosh, make it work. It doesn't matter if you're making a pie, doesn't matter if you're making an applesauce, doesn't matter if this isn't the apple you really like, too bad it's the apple you get. Our company believes you should have all the apples. That's all he does. He doesn't talk science, he doesn't talk engineering, nothing. He tells that story, says that's what our company does. He ends up getting more leads than the other 4 scientists combined, because he went on the stage and told a story. And the thing John didn't understand that I understood was, not only did he tell a great story that was relatable and funny, but all of those people in that conference, when they go grocery shopping, they're going to find themselves in front of a table full of apples, and they're going to be thinking about John in a positive way, about what he does, what his company does, and what they have to offer. When we tell stories, when we can weave those personal stories into the work that we do, and we can land relatable moments for people, we sort of create these advertisements for the things we do in the world by just having people run into them. You know, in the same way, if you pull into a gas station at some point today, it is likely you might think about me, right? Because you're going to think, oh, that's right, Matt told a story about pulling into a gas station. Or the next time you get a flat tire, you're going to think about me because I've given you a story related to a flat tire. And if it meant something to you, I've now hooked myself into your life in a meaningful way. So when we can do that as salespeople and marketers and branding specialists and CEOs, when we can actually infuse the work we do with these personal stories from ourselves or from our customers or from the world, then we can really have an impact on how people feel about us, what we do, the products we sell, the services we offer, those kinds of things. So that's what the book does. It seeks to help people see the ways that they can deploy storytelling into the work they do.
Thanks. That's really cool. I thought a good way to finish would be maybe you could tell the story of when you nearly died.
Which time?
The
car?
I don't want to give away. Yeah,
Okay.
the one
Right.
we're all a bit about cars, so we should try and keep a bit of car related stuff.
Sure.
And for me, this is a great story too. So why don't we finish on that, and then we can wrap up.
I'd be happy to. Let's see. It's December 23rd, 1988. I am 17 years old. I'm coming out of a record store, which is a brick and mortar establishment which used to sell music in a physical form. I'm walking out with a shopping bag in my hand, and as I take a right on the sidewalk, I see my friend Pat walking down the sidewalk. Pat sees me, sees the bag in my hand, and says, "What's inside?" And I say, "Oh, it's a Christmas present." It's actually a surprise Christmas present. It's a surprise Christmas present for our friend Benji, my best friend in the world. Pat looks at me a little funny. He's only 14 at the time, but he's already cooler than I will ever be in my entire life. And so I have learned that when Pat looks at me like this, I need to pay attention. Pat tells me, guys don't buy Christmas presents for other guys. He tells me, guys especially don't buy surprise Christmas presents for other guys. Pat tells me he's had multiple girlfriends at a time for long periods of time and never bought them anything. So the fact that I have bought a surprise Christmas present for Benji is a little weird. I'm now feeling very self-conscious about the beta fish in the backseat of my car, the surprise Christmas present I bought for Pat like half an hour ago at the pet store, and the comic books I bought for Coog and the sweatshirt I bought for Lisa. I've piled the backseat of my car with surprise Christmas presents for my friends. And it is weird to be a 17-year-old kid Christmas shopping for your friends. But it's been a long time since I've had a good Christmas, and I've decided that this year is going to be different. And it is different. I'm 17. I'm a senior in high school, my last year of high school, but I'm also managing a McDonald's restaurant full time. I've been promoted to manager, and I work 40 hours a week in this restaurant while going to school. I'm rich. Like, I have more money than anyone I know, including my parents. And I've been saving this money over the last 3 months so I could go buy Christmas presents for my friends. My goal is to buy the Christmas that I've always wanted, rather than the Christmases have had over the last few years, which, because of my parents' pending divorce and our poverty, have just been, they've been holidays I wish didn't happen. So I've got a car full of presents and I need to get home. I need to get home because I got to get the betta fish out of the car or it's going to freeze to death. But I also have to get home to get my McDonald's uniform because I have a shift in a little while and I'm running late. I've never shopped before in my life because I've never actually had money before in my life. So I had no idea how long and how painful shopping can be. So I'm running late. I'm driving my mother's 1978 Datsun B210. It is a car about the size of a box of Pop-Tarts, filled to the rim with presents. And I'm driving down this little road in this town, Mendon, Massachusetts. It's this little country farm town. It's beautiful. It's snowing. It's the first snowfall of the year. The lawns are starting to turn white, and every single house is decorated for Christmas. It's like driving by a picture postcard of Christmas, each house I pass. And I start to really believe in my heart that this is going to be the Christmas that I have always wanted in my life. I come up a hill, and as I come down the backside of that hill, my car starts to slide in the snow and the ice on the road. It starts to slide into the opposite lane. I look up and I see a white Mercedes-Benz coming right at me. They say that in moments like this, time will slow down or even stop, and it's absolutely true. In the seconds it takes for our two cars to collide head on, I have exactly 3 thoughts. The first is, I'm not wearing my seatbelt. And I always wear my seatbelt. But in the rush to get home and the excitement over shopping, I've forgotten to put my seatbelt on the worst day of my life to forget. The second thought I have is, I've always been told in situations like this, I'm supposed to steer into the skid. It occurs to me in that moment, I don't know what the fuck that means. Like, as a 53-year-old man, I still don't know what steer into the skid means. And the last thought I have is one sentence. It's 5 words long. I actually say it out loud. I say, this is going to suck. And it does. When our 2 cars collide, I am thrown forward and my head goes through the windshield. But I'm not fully ejected from the car because my legs surge forward and they get caught in the air conditioning unit. My right leg gets torn right down to the bone, and my left leg hits the emergency brake release. It knocks that little plastic handle off, but the post skewers right through my knee. And then my face comes forward, my chin hits the steering wheel, and it knocks the entire bottom row of my teeth out in one piece and sends them to the back of my mouth. And then my chest hits the steering wheel and breaks all my ribs, knocks all the air out of my body. It happens in a second, a split second. And then shock, blessed shock, descends upon me. And so I feel no pain and I have no fear. I pull my head out of the windshield and I pull my legs out of the air conditioning unit and off that post. And I actually managed to get myself out of the car. I'm sort of standing half crumpled, holding onto the door, when the driver from the Mercedes-Benz I see her. She's a woman. She's walking towards me. She sees me, vomits, and passes out on the side of the road. The next people to arrive right after that, it's a truck full of kids, and they're all in the back of the truck, like the way back. And they're jumping out, and they're running over to me. The first kid to get to me, he's just about my age. He grabs me by my bloody jean jacket, lays me down in the snow and the mud on the side of the road. He looks me over, and then he gets really close to my ear, and he whispers to me. He says, dude, you're fucked. It is the most accurate medical assessment that I received that day. The next person to arrive is a police officer. He finds me on the side of the road. He's worried that I'm cold, so he takes his coat off. He lays it on top of me, not knowing that I can barely breathe already. It feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds on my chest. It's starting to really snow now, and I'm having a hard time with it, so I close my eyes. And when I open them again, I'm in the back of the ambulance. I'm in the back of the ambulance. There's a woman straddling my waist, and she's pounding on my chest, which is on fire now. And there's a man behind me trying to force a clear plastic tube down my throat, and I start coughing. And he starts shouting, he's back, he's back. And I am wondering who is back, and where did he go, and where the hell am I? And I will find out later, like much, much later, that I was the one who was back. that for about 2 minutes in the back of that ambulance, I stopped breathing and my heart stopped beating. But thanks to CPR, I am now back. So now I'm in an emergency room and I'm surrounded by people. There's nurses with tweezers picking out hundreds of pieces of glass from my head. And there's doctors starting to work on my legs because both of them are going to require surgery. The woman comes over to me, a nurse, and she asks me who I am because they cut all of my clothes off at the car accident scene. And in the process, they lost my wallet. So they don't even know what my name is. So as dental surgeons are jamming that chunk of teeth that have been floating in my mouth the whole time, they're jamming them down into my jaw and wiring them down. It's the most painful thing that's ever happened to me. As that's happening, she's asking me, what's your name? What's your name? And so when I can speak again, I tell her my name. I give her my parents' phone number. And then I give her the phone number for McDonald's. I tell her I'm supposed to be at work in a little while. You need to call. She looks at me like I'm crazy, and I kind of am because I was actually dead a little while ago, but now I'm worried about McDonald's. But the drive-thru doesn't run well when I'm not there, and Linda Diaz is absolutely going to need some help if it's going to work well today. We fight, me and this nurse going back and forth, and finally she's like, fine, I will call. And so I'm lying in this emergency room, people who barely know my name, who I don't know at all, working hard to keep me alive. And as they're doing this, I see that the faces on the people around me, especially the nurses, they begin to shift. And I know what they're thinking because I am thinking the same thing. I have been in the emergency room for a very long time, and my parents have not arrived yet. Like, what the hell is going on? I'll find out later that when they called my home, the nurse told my stepfather that I was in stable condition. And so they drove to see the car, to check on the car before they came to check on me. So I'm not going to see my parents before I'm rolled into surgery that day. So I'm lying in this emergency room feeling as alone as I've ever felt. But it turns out I'm not alone because that nurse ended up calling McDonald's like she promised. And the manager on duty takes the call and begins an old-fashioned phone tree. My friends start calling my friends, start calling my friends, and now they're arriving at the hospital. And I know they're arriving because they're teenagers, and they're loud. I can hear them. I can hear them in the waiting room just outside the emergency room, 16 and 17 and 18-year-old kids in ripped jeans and concert T-shirts, and one 14-year-old boy who's cooler than all of them. And the first person to arrive that day is my best friend, Benji. And so when the nurses understand that I'm not going to see my parents before I'm rolled into surgery, they prop open the double doors of the emergency room and they let my friends stand in the doorway. And the girls tell me they love me, and the boys say incredibly inappropriate things to make me laugh. And I can hear them chanting my name as I'm rolled down into surgery that day. None of the gifts that I buy my friends that day survived the accident. Everything is lost in the car. And the only casualty of the day is the betta fish. It does not survive the accident, tragically. But it turns out that Pat was wrong on that sidewalk when he told me friends don't get friends surprise Christmas presents. Because that day, Pat and Benji and all my friends, they gave me the best gift I've ever been given in my life. They give me the gift of family when I need it the most. And until I meet my wife 15 years later, those people are the only family I have and the only family that I need. Thank you. Ugh.
What an amazing story. Thank you so much. Yeah, awesome.
Let me just add
we
one thing. A good story. I tell this story a lot for storytelling purposes. It's funny because when I tell that story, it airs on the radio here in the United States around Christmas a lot. And I get a lot of emails from it. No one has ever emailed me and said, I love the story about the time you died in the car accident and got brought back to life. They always email me and say, I love the story about the time your friends came to the emergency room and became your family. I can't even say that sentence without becoming emotional. But it's the idea that big things can't really be the story. I can't tell a story about going through a windshield and dying on the side of a road because no one can relate to that. Hopefully none of you can relate to that. Like, I still have glass in my forehead to this day from that accident. Hopefully none of you experienced that. But we all understand what it's like to be let down by parents or friends or even a boss, right? We understand what it's like to feel alone in a moment. And then hopefully all of us at some point have been unexpectedly picked up by a friend or by a family member, by someone. A colleague has saved us in a moment when we needed saving. And so if we have a big story like that, because we all have those stories, not that particular one, but I'm sure you have big moments in your life, they tend not to have any emotional resonance unless we find the small thing within the big story, the thing that is relatable to everyone. And so when I tell that story in live audiences, people often cry at the end of the story. But I always point out, nobody cries when I die. When I tell people I go through a windshield and I'm dead in an ambulance, they just blink at me. They're like, whatever, man. That nobody cares. No one becomes emotional at that point because there's no emotional connection to that. No matter how horrific I make it sound, they're like, well, you're still standing here. I'm sure it's fine. But as soon as I tell people that my friend showed up in the emergency room, they all fall to pieces. And that's because that's the relatable part. So I tell the story a lot for that reason, even though it's not always the easiest story for me to tell.
No, I love that story. I was just trying not to give away the ending when I was asking for it, but yeah, it was a fantastic story.
Well, when I was 12, I got stung by a bee and I died and got brought back to life through CPR that time too. So twice in my life, I've had people pounding on my chest, bringing life back to me.
Does anyone have any questions or anything they desperately want to ask Matt? Go on, Stevie.
Hey, Matt. In your book, you kind of ruined movies for me by saying the start of the movie kind of explains how it's going to end. Is there any movies you've watched recently that you've been very surprised by how the story went?
That's a great question. There was one that did a double flip on me. It flipped on me twice. I remember going, wow, they double flip. Well, there's a movie in the theaters now here in America called Thelma, which surprised the hell out of me. It's about an old lady. It's sort of Batman meets the elderly, and that doesn't give anything away. But it sort of surprised the hell out of me. Now, I knew where it was going to end emotionally because I knew where it began emotionally. But sometimes I can accurately predict what the particulars of the ending are going to be. Like, oh, well, she's going to do this and he's going to do that. Like, I can sort of see what's going to happen. And this one, the particulars of the ending of the movie really surprised me in a really meaningful way. It doesn't happen often, though. I'm watching the new Eddie Murphy Beverly Hills Cop movie, you know, and I was like 2 minutes into that movie when I said, oh, this is about him resolving his relationship with his daughter. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of shooting and a car chase and, you know, a helicopter and all those things have happened. But ultimately, it's a movie about a man who's estranged from his daughter for a long period of time. And they're going to have to resolve that estrangement, right? Which is like the Jurassic Park of Beverly Hills Cop, which is there has to actually be a story behind the nonsense in order for it to have any resonance at all. But that movie Thelma, there was another movie that double flipped on me. Oh, you know what? What's the horror movie? The horror movie, I don't want to give it away. The horror movie about the man on the plantation who discovers, again, I'm trying not to give it away.
Like Get Out?
Which one?
Get Out?
Yes, Get Out surprised me. Get Out. I was like, damn, I don't know anything about this movie. Like sometimes you're in a movie and you're like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I was also sort of misdirected in terms of what the movie was about. Someone said, oh, it's a horror movie that takes place just in a house. And I was like, what? All right, I guess I'll go watch it. And that's not what it's about at all. I never saw any of that coming. I also love a movie where I can't figure out how the good guy is going to escape the bad guy. You know, and that was a movie where I was like, I don't know how this guy's getting out of this. I just don't see this happening. And I love those moments because when I can't figure out a way to get a good guy out of a terrible situation, I'm thrilled. Actually, the way I write my novels is that my wife says the thing she loves about my novels is I write my characters into impossible situations. And then I force myself to figure out how they might get out of it without changing the situation. I could just backtrack and make it a little easier for them, but I never do. I create really challenging situations, and then me as the author I have to sort of unpuzzle the way that the protagonist will get out of it. And I think that's the best way to sort of write a story, is to put yourself in a corner and then force yourself to find a way out of that corner. So I like those stories too.
Nice.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much. I think we'll end it there. We've taken up enough of your time. So, Matt, I really, really appreciate this, and it's been super interesting. And yeah, thank you so much. And I look forward to reading your new book as well. And,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So, you know, I'm always happy to chat about it. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.